The crisp autumn wind whipped through the concrete canyons of Manhattan, sending scattered leaves dancing past Trump Tower's gleaming facade. On the corner, a lone figure huddled against the cold, her weathered military jacket pulled tight around her shoulders. Mary Chen hadn't planned on ending up here. Nobody ever does. Just 3 years ago, she'd been leading convoy missions through dusty Afghan roads, respected and confident in her role as a staff sergeant. The morning crowd rushed past, their designer boots and polished Oxfords clicking against the sidewalk, each person wrapped in their own New York minute. Some avoided looking at her entirely, while others would occasionally drop $1 or some change, murmuring quick words of sympathy. Marie didn't want their pity, but 8 months on the streets had taught her to swallow her pride. She kept her small area tidy, another habit from her military days. A worn cardboard sign leaned against her backpack, reading Veteran, any help appreciated. Her few possessions were neatly arranged: a folded blanket, a water bottle, and a small photo album she couldn't bear to part with. The album contained snapshots of happier times, graduation day from basic training, her unit gathered around a Humvee, the proud smile on her face when she received her last promotion. The transition back to civilian life had been harder than any combat mission. The constant noise of the city, car horns, construction, sirens, would send her heart racing, memories of explosions and gunfire flooding back. The VA appointments seemed to lead nowhere. The waiting lists got longer, and the paperwork piled up. Her savings dwindled as she bounced between temporary jobs, each one ending when the nightmares got too bad or the crowds became too overwhelming. That morning felt different somehow. The air had that special New York fall crispness, and the sun painted the skyscrapers in shades of gold. Marie sipped the lukewarm coffee a kind deli owner had given her, watching the usual parade of business people, tourists, and city workers flow past. She'd learned to read their faces, who would avoid eye contact, who might spare some change, who might stop to chat. A group of suited men emerged from Trump Tower's revolving doors, their presence immediately drawing attention from passersby. Secret Service agents scanned the area with practiced efficiency, their earpieces and alert postures marking them clearly. Marie noticed them but didn't pay much attention. She'd seen plenty of VIPs come and go from the building. But then something unexpected happened. The crowd in the center parted, and there he was, Donald Trump himself, his distinctive silhouette unmistakable against the building's entrance. He was heading toward his waiting vehicle when his eyes fell on Marie's military jacket. For a moment, their gazes met across the busy sidewalk. What happened next would soon be captured on dozens of cell phones and shared millions of times across social media. But in that moment, it was just two people, a former commander-in-chief and a forgotten soldier, seeing each other as human beings on a chilly Manhattan morning. Trump raised his hand, halting his security detail, and began walking toward Marie's corner. The busy New York street seemed to hold its breath. Pedestrians slowed their hurried pace, phones emerged from pockets and purses, and the everyday symphony of the city quieted just a bit. Marie straightened her posture instinctively. Old habits die hard when someone important approaches. She wasn't sure what to expect, but after months of feeling invisible on these streets, she knew something meaningful was about to happen. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Donald Trump made his way toward Marie's corner. His security detail exchanged concerned glances, but maintained their protective formation around him. Some people even stopped taking photos, too caught up in the moment unfolding before them. "That's a military jacket you're wearing," Trump said, his voice carrying across the now quiet sidewalk. The way he said it wasn't a question, but a statement of recognition. Marie nodded, her hand unconsciously brushing the worn fabric of her sleeve. The jacket had seen better days, but the unit patches were still clear and proud on her shoulder. Trump did something that surprised everyone. He crouched down to Marie's level, ignoring the wrinkles forming in his expensive suit. His security team shifted nervously, but he waved them back. "Which branch?" he asked, his usual boisterous public persona replaced by something quieter, more focused. "Army, sir," Marie replied, her voice steady despite her surprise. "3 tours in Afghanistan." She found herself sitting up straighter, speaking with the clarity that had been drilled into her during her service years. Around them, the morning crowd had grown larger, with office workers pausing their commutes and tourists gathering at a respectful distance. "When did you come home?" Trump asked, settling into what seemed like it might be more than just a passing conversation. A gentle breeze ruffled his signature hairstyle, but for once, he didn't seem to notice or care. Marie took a deep breath. 14 months ago, sir. Things haven't been easy since then." Her voice caught slightly on the last words, memories of sleepless nights and endless paperwork flooding back. The street noise of Manhattan faded into the background as she found herself sharing more of her story. She told him about the PTSD that made holding down a regular job nearly impossible, about the overwhelming process of seeking help through the VA system, about how one missed rent payment had led to another, until finally, the streets became her only option. Trump listened intently, occasionally nodding, his expression growing more serious with each detail. The growing crowd of onlookers had their phones out, recording every moment. But this didn't feel like a publicity stunt. There was something genuine happening here, something that caught everyone off guard. A few veterans in the crowd recognized the familiar signs of one of their own in need, and their expressions showed understanding rather than judgment. Without warning, Trump stood up and turned to one of his assistants. "Get me Robert on the phone," he said, his voice taking on the commanding tone he was better known for, "and find out which hotels we own in the area have vacancies." The assistant scrambled to comply, phone already in hand. Trump turned back to Marie. "The system failed you," he said, loud enough for nearby onlookers to hear. "That's not acceptable. Not for someone who served our country." He shrugged off his own coat, a move that caused his security detail to step forward instinctively, and draped it over Marie's shoulders. The simple gesture struck a chord with everyone watching. Here was one of the most powerful men in the world, giving his coat to a homeless veteran on a chilly New York morning. Phones captured the moment, but more importantly, hearts were moved. Some people in the crowd wiped away tears, while others nodded in approval. Mary sat there, wrapped in a coat that probably cost more than everything she owned, watching as Trump began making phone calls right there on the sidewalk. His voice carried snippets of conversations about veteran services, housing arrangements, and immediate assistance. This wasn't the dismissive wave of a politician scoring points. This was someone taking direct action. The morning sun continued to climb over Manhattan's skyline, warming the cool autumn air. For the first time in months, Marie felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not just for herself, but for all the other veterans who'd fallen through the cracks. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of human connection. The next few hours passed in a blur for Marie. Trump's team moved with surprising speed, transforming his impromptu sidewalk decision into immediate action. A sleek black SUV waited nearby, its warm interior a stark contrast to the concrete sidewalk she'd called home for months. "Let's get you somewhere comfortable," Trump said, helping Marie to her feet. The crowd parted respectfully, many still recording but maintaining a dignified distance. Some onlookers smiled encouragingly, while others nodded in approval. This wasn't the usual Manhattan street scene. It was a moment of genuine human connection playing out in the heart of the city. The ride to the hotel felt surreal. Marie sat quietly, still wrapped in Trump's coat, watching the familiar streets pass by from an unfamiliar vantage point. She'd walked these same blocks countless times, but never like this. Trump sat across from her, still making calls, his voice filled with purpose and determination. "Listen, Bill," he was saying into his phone. "I've got a veteran here who needs immediate assistance. Yes, right now. We need to cut through the red tape." He paused, listening. "No, that's not good enough. These are our veterans we're talking about. Make it happen today." The hotel staff were waiting when they arrived. trying to hide their surprise at the unexpected guests. The manager, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stepped forward immediately. "We have our best suite ready, sir," she said, then turned to Marie with a warm smile. "Would you like to freshen up first?" Marie found herself guided to a luxurious hotel suite bigger than her old apartment. The bathroom mirror reflected back a face she barely recognized. Tired eyes, weathered skin, but now with something new, a spark of hope. The hot shower felt like washing away months of hardship, even if the memories couldn't be so easily cleansed. Meanwhile, Trump had transformed the suite's living room into a temporary command center. His team had brought in representatives from various veterans organizations, each one ready to help. A VA official arrived, apologizing profusely for the previous delays in Marie's case. The paperwork that had seemed insurmountable for months was now being handled with unprecedented speed. "Your military records show an exemplary service record," one of the veterans' advocates said, reviewing her file. "You shouldn't have had to go through this. We're going to make this right." Marie noticed how Trump nodded firmly at these words, still making calls in the background. A doctor arrived to check on Marie, showing genuine concern about her PTSD symptoms. "We'll set up regular sessions," she promised, writing out prescriptions and referrals. "You don't have to handle this alone anymore." Throughout all this activity, news of the morning's events had spread across social media like wildfire. The videos of Trump's sidewalk encounter were being shared millions of times, but something unexpected was happening in the comments. Instead of the usual political arguments, people were sharing stories of other veterans who needed help. The conversation was shifting from a single act of kindness to a larger discussion about veteran care. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the hotel windows, Marie sat in a comfortable chair, trying to process everything that had happened. Trump approached her one last time before leaving. "This is just the beginning," he said, his voice quieter than his public persona. "We're going to make sure you get back on your feet. And not just you. We're going to find others who need help too." The simple sincerity of his words struck Marie deeply. This wasn't about politics or photo ops anymore. It was about one human being seeing another struggle and choosing to act. As Trump and his team prepared to leave, he turned back one last time. "Keep the coat," he said with a small smile. "It looks better on you anyway." That night, lying in the softest bed she'd felt in months, Marie thought about how life could change in an instant. Sometimes it took hitting rock bottom to find out that people still cared. That hope could appear in the most unexpected places, wearing the most unexpected faces. The next morning, Marie woke up to the unfamiliar comfort of clean sheets and soft pillows. For a brief moment, she wondered if yesterday had been just another dream. But there it was, Trump's coat hanging neatly on a nearby chair, a silent reminder that everything had really happened. Her phone, newly activated by Trump's team, was buzzing with messages. News outlets wanted to hear her story. Veterans organizations reached out with support, and social media was exploding with reactions to yesterday's events. But what caught her attention most was a message from a local veterans support group. "You're not alone anymore. We're here to help." A knock at the door revealed a friendly hotel staff member with breakfast. "Compliments of Mr. Trump," she said, wheeling in a cart loaded with fresh fruit, warm pastries, and steaming coffee. The simple luxury of a hot breakfast brought tears to Marie's eyes. It had been so long since someone had shown such basic kindness. As she ate, Marie watched the morning news coverage of yesterday's events. The story had taken on a life of its own. Videos of Trump's sidewalk encounter had gone viral, but surprisingly, the focus wasn't on him. Instead, news channels were discussing the broader issue of veteran homelessness. Experts were being interviewed, statistics were being shared, and most importantly, other veterans were coming forward with their stories. Mid-morning brought a visit from Lisa, a VA counselor specifically assigned to Marie's case. "We've expedited everything," she explained, spreading papers across the hotel room's desk. "Your benefits are being reinstated, and we found a temporary housing program specifically designed for veterans." The paperwork that had once seemed like an insurmountable wall now felt manageable with Lisa's help. Trump's team had been busy too. A local job training program had reached out, offering Marie a spot in their next class. They specialize in helping veterans transition their military skills to civilian careers, Lisa explained, and they've got a great success rate. But perhaps the most touching development came from fellow veterans. A local Vietnam veteran had seen the news and arrived at the hotel with a bag of new clothes. "We take care of our own," he said simply, his weathered face showing understanding that went beyond words. Or at least, we should. Throughout the day, more people came forward to help. A dentist offered free dental work. A local gym provided a membership to help Marie regain her physical strength. Each gesture, small or large, added another piece to the puzzle of rebuilding a life. By late afternoon, Marie found herself sitting in a coffee shop across from the hotel, trying to process everything. The barista, recognizing her from the news, refused to let her pay. "My brother served in Iraq," she explained. "This one's on the house." Looking out the coffee shop window, Marie could see the corner where she'd spent so many hopeless months. It seemed like another world now. A text message buzzed on her phone. It was from Trump's personal assistant. "Mr. Trump wanted to make sure you're doing okay. He's arranged for you to stay at the hotel until your permanent housing is ready." The simple message brought fresh tears to her eyes. In just over 24 hours, her life had completely changed direction. But more than that, she realized she'd become part of something bigger. Her story was shining a light on an issue that had been in the shadows for too long. As the sun began to set over Manhattan, casting long shadows between the towering buildings, Marie made a promise to herself. Once she got back on her feet, she would find ways to help others who were still struggling. Sometimes all it took was one person to care, one moment of genuine human connection, to start a chain reaction of kindness. That evening, as she walked back to the hotel, several people recognized her from the news. But they didn't see a homeless veteran anymore. They saw Hope walking down a Manhattan street, wearing a borrowed coat, and carrying the promise of better days ahead. 1 week had passed since that life-changing morning outside Trump Tower. The story had taken on a momentum of its own, sparking a nationwide conversation about veteran homelessness. Marie's hotel room had become an unexpected command center for what was quickly becoming a movement. Local business leaders, inspired by Trump's spontaneous act of kindness, began reaching out. A real estate developer offered several apartments in his buildings for veteran housing. A tech company CEO launched a job training program specifically for veterans with PTSD. Each day brought new offers of help, not just for Marie, but for other veterans in similar situations. Trump himself had remained involved, but in ways that surprised many. Instead of using the situation for publicity, he worked quietly behind the scenes. His team had assembled a task force of veterans advocates, mental health professionals, and business leaders. They weren't just talking about change. They were making it happen. Marie's phone rang early that morning. It was the job training program coordinator. "We've got something special in mind," she explained. "We'd like you to help us design a program for other veterans. Who better to understand their needs than someone who's walked in their shoes?" The offer brought tears to Marie's eyes. Not just a job, but a chance to make a real difference. Later that day, Marie visited her new apartment. It was modest but clean, with big windows that let in plenty of natural light. The property manager, whose son had served in Iraq, had already furnished it with donated items. "Consider it a welcome home gift," she said, handing over the keys. From one military family to another. The local news station wanted to do a follow-up story, but Marie had a different idea. Instead of focusing on her, she suggested highlighting other veterans who needed help. "Let's share their stories," she said. "Let's make sure they don't have to hit rock bottom before getting help." The reporter, touched by her suggestion, agreed immediately. That afternoon, Marie attended her first PTSD support group. The room was full of veterans, each with their own story. When she shared her experience, others nodded in understanding. "Your story gave us hope," one veteran said quietly. "If things can change for you, maybe they can change for us too." Trump's coat, now cleaned and pressed, hung in Marie's new closet. She'd offered to return it, but his team insisted she keep it. It had become more than just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of how a simple act of kindness could spark real change. The VA office, perhaps spurred by the media attention, had undergone its own transformation. The same bureaucracy that had once seemed impenetrable was now actively reaching out to veterans in need. Marie's caseworker had started a new initiative to identify and help homeless veterans before they ended up on the streets. As evening approached, Marie sat by her new apartment window, watching the city lights come on. Her phone buzzed with a message. Another veteran had been found sleeping rough in Central Park. Without hesitation, she grabbed Trump's coat and headed out. It was her turn now, to be the one who stopped, who cared, who took action. The city felt different now. The same streets that had once felt cold and hostile now seemed full of possibility. People who might have walked past a homeless veteran now stopped to help. Small acts of kindness were multiplying, creating a web of support that grew stronger each day. As she walked through the park, Marie thought about how life could change in an instant. Sometimes it took one person to break through the invisible walls we build around others' suffering. One moment of genuine human connection could start a chain reaction that touched countless lives. The coat she wore still carried the weight of that first morning's kindness, but now it carried something more. The responsibility to pass that kindness forward, to be the change she had experienced firsthand. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply to see someone, really see them, and reach out a helping hand. 2 weeks after the encounter that changed everything, Marie stood at the podium in a packed community center. The crowd before her included veterans, business leaders, city officials, and regular New Yorkers who'd been touched by her story. She wore Trump's coat. It had become a symbol of hope for many. "When I was on that street corner," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I felt invisible. But one moment of genuine kindness changed everything." The room fell silent, hanging on her words. "Today, we're here to make sure no veteran ever feels invisible again." The community center had been transformed into a one-stop resource hub for veterans in need. Medical professionals offered free checkups in one corner. Job recruiters conducted interviews in another. VA representatives helped process paperwork at tables along the wall. The whole operation had come together in just 2 weeks, sparked by one sidewalk encounter. Trump had kept his word about making lasting change. His business connections had created a network of support that went beyond temporary solutions. Companies across the city had pledged to hire veterans. Property owners offered reduced rent apartments. Restaurant chains provided meal programs. It wasn't charity, it was community in action. Marie walked through the crowd, stopping to talk with veterans who shared stories similar to her own. An older veteran gripped her hand tightly. "I saw you on the news," he said, voice trembling. "I've been living in my car for 6 months. I wasn't going to come today, but something told me I should." Within hours, he had housing arrangements and a job interview scheduled. The local police department had started a new program, training officers to identify and assist homeless veterans. "We want to help before they end up on the streets," the police chief explained. "Your story showed us we needed to do better." A group of veterans who'd received help through the program were already paying it forward. They'd started a mentoring system, helping others navigate the challenges of civilian life. "It's like battle buddies," one explained. "We look out for each other. No one gets left behind." The media coverage had evolved too. Instead of focusing on the sensational aspects of Trump's involvement, reporters were diving deep into the issues facing veterans. Stories of other successful interventions began appearing. The conversation was changing from "why does this happen?" to "how can we help?" Marie's phone buzzed constantly with messages from veterans and their families across the country. Similar programs were starting in other cities, inspired by what was happening in New York. The ripple effect kept growing, touching more lives each day. A young veteran approached Marie, tears in her eyes. "I lost my apartment last month," she whispered. "I've been too ashamed to tell anyone. Seeing your story, it gave me courage to ask for help." Marie hugged her tight, remembering her own feelings of shame and isolation. As the afternoon wound down, Marie took a moment to step outside. The autumn air was getting colder, reminding her of that morning that changed everything. A text message appeared on her phone. It was from Trump. "Proud of what you're doing. Keep going. You're changing lives." Looking back at the busy community center, Marie saw hope in action. People weren't just talking about helping veterans. They were doing it. The invisible walls that had separated those in need from those who could help were coming down, one connection at a time. She touched the sleeve of Trump's coat, remembering how it felt when he draped it over her shoulders. That simple act of kindness had started something bigger than anyone could have imagined. It proved that sometimes the smallest gestures could spark the biggest changes. As the sun set over the city, Marie watched more veterans arrive at the center, each carrying their own story, their own struggles, their own hopes. The day wasn't over yet. There were more hands to hold, more lives to touch, more hope to share. Because that's what happens when people choose to see each other, really see each other, and reach out with kindness. 1 month had passed since that fateful morning outside Trump Tower. Marie stood at the window of her new office, overlooking the busy Manhattan streets below. The same streets that had once been her home now felt like a reminder of how far she'd come, and how many others still needed help. Her desk was covered with letters from veterans across the country. Each envelope contained a story, a struggle, a hope for change. She read every single one, remembering her own days of feeling lost and invisible. But now she was in a position to do something about it. The Veterans Support Center she helped create had already assisted over 200 former service members. Each success story added another thread to the growing web of hope. A former Marine who'd been sleeping in his car was now working as a security consultant. A Navy veteran had reunited with her children after finding stable housing. These weren't just statistics. They were lives transformed. Trump's influence had opened doors, but it was the community that walked through them. Local businesses continued to step up, offering jobs, housing, and support. The program had taken on a life of its own, growing beyond what anyone had imagined that first morning. Marie's phone lit up with a message from her VA counselor. "You need to see this," it read, followed by a link to a news article. Congress was discussing new legislation to improve veteran services, sparked in part by the movement that had started on that Manhattan street corner. The article mentioned how one act of kindness had snowballed into national change. Later that afternoon, Marie visited a newly opened veteran transition house. The building, once abandoned, had been renovated by volunteers and local contractors. In the common room, veterans gathered for support meetings, job training, and simple companionship. The walls were decorated with military photos and artwork, reminders of service, sacrifice, and strength. A young veteran approached her, clutching a newspaper clipping of the original story. "I was ready to give up," he said quietly. "Then I saw what happened with you. It made me believe things could get better." His hand shook as he spoke, but his eyes held hope. By the end of the day, he had a place in the transition program and a job interview scheduled. The coat Trump had given her now hung in a display case in the center's lobby. Next to it was a simple plaque. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change a life. Veterans often stopped to look at it, touching the glass gently, as if drawing strength from what it represented. Marie's PTSD hadn't magically disappeared, but she had better tools to manage it now. Regular therapy sessions, support groups, and meaningful work made each day a little easier. More importantly, she no longer faced the battles alone. The community that had formed around her became a source of strength and understanding. That evening, she attended a graduation ceremony for the first class of veterans who'd completed the job training program. 20 former service members, each with their own story of struggle and survival, received certificates and job placements. The room buzzed with pride and possibility. A reporter covering the ceremony asked Marie how it felt to see such change. She thought carefully before answering. "A month ago, I was invisible on these streets," she said. "Now I see how many people want to help. They just needed to be shown how." That's the real miracle here. Not what happened to me, but what happened through me. As night fell over the city, Marie walked the streets that had once been her home. She passed the corner where Trump had stopped that morning, now marked with a small bronze plaque. Other corners that had once hosted homeless veterans were now empty, not because people had been pushed away, but because they'd been helped up. Her phone buzzed with another message, this time from someone she'd helped recently. "Started my new job today. Thank you for showing me it was possible." Marie smiled, remembering her own journey. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give others is to show them that change is possible. That hope is real. That kindness has power. 3 months had passed since that life-changing morning. Winter had settled over Manhattan, bringing bitter winds and swirling snow. Marie pulled Trump's coat tighter around her shoulders as she hurried through the city streets. She wasn't wearing it for warmth anymore. She had her own warm winter coat now. This coat had become her armor when she needed extra strength. Today, she needed that strength. She was heading to a city council meeting where she would present the results of their veterans program. The numbers were impressive. Over 500 veterans helped, 3 new transition homes opened, and dozens of businesses joining the support network. But the real story wasn't in the statistics. The real story was in people like the former Army medic who now ran the health clinic at their main center, or the retired Marine who turned his cooking skills into a catering business that employed other veterans. Each success story added another brick to the foundation of hope they were building. Trump's initial act of kindness had sparked something that took on a life of its own. Other cities were now copying their program, adapting it to their own communities. Marie spent hours on video calls, sharing their experiences and helping other groups get started. The movement was growing beyond New York's borders. As she walked into City Hall, Marie remembered how different things had been just a few months ago. The same security guards who might have once asked her to move along now greeted her with respect. "Big day today," one said with an encouraging smile. "We're all rooting for you." The council chamber was packed. Veterans, business leaders, and community members filled every seat. But what caught Marie's eye was the back row. Several people who looked like she had 3 months ago, wearing worn clothes and tired expressions. Her heart ached, knowing exactly how they felt. When it was her turn to speak, Marie didn't use the prepared speech sitting in her folder. Instead, she pointed to the people in the back row. "3 months ago, that was me," she said simply. "Today, I'm here to tell you that what we're doing is working. But there's so much more to do." She shared stories of veterans who'd found their way back from the edge. A former helicopter pilot who now had her own business. A combat engineer who'd become a valued construction foreman. An intelligence officer who now taught computer skills to other veterans. The council members listened intently as Marie outlined their plans for expansion. More transition homes, better mental health services, stronger job training programs. But what really caught their attention was when she talked about prevention. Stopping veterans from reaching crisis point in the first place. After the meeting, one of the people from the back row approached her. "I didn't know there was help like this," he said quietly. "I served in the Gulf War. Been on the streets for 8 months." Within an hour, he was registered in their program, had a warm meal in his stomach, and a safe place to sleep that night. That evening, Marie received an unexpected call. Trump was on the line, wanting an update. He listened as she shared their progress, occasionally asking thoughtful questions. "You've taken this further than I ever imagined," he said. "What do you need to keep it growing?" As they talked, Marie watched the snow fall outside her office window. Each snowflake reminded her of how individual acts of kindness could add up to something bigger. One person helping another, then another, then another, until suddenly you had a movement that could change lives. Her phone buzzed with a text from the veteran they'd helped that morning. He'd sent a photo of himself, smiling, in his new temporary room. First real bed in months. The message read, "Thank you for seeing me." Those words hit home. Being seen, really seen, was sometimes all it took to start the journey back. Marie touched the sleeve of Trump's coat, remembering that moment when she'd been seen, when someone had stopped and chosen to make a difference. Now she was passing that moment forward, again and again. Night settled over the city, but lights blazed in veteran centers across Manhattan. Hope didn't sleep, and neither did the movement they'd built. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of human connection, of one person saying to another, "I see you. You matter. Let me help." 1 year had passed. Marie stood at the exact spot where Trump had found her that autumn morning. The sidewalk looked the same, but everything else had changed. A small ceremony was about to begin. They were dedicating a new Veterans Resource Center right across from Trump Tower. The crowd gathered for the opening included faces both familiar and new. Veterans who'd been helped by the program stood tall in fresh suits and pressed uniforms. Business leaders who'd supported their cause mingled with city officials. Reporters set up their cameras, ready to capture the moment. Trump arrived without fanfare, smaller than his usual entourage. He looked at the building, then at Marie, a quiet smile of approval on his face. "When I gave you my coat that day," he said softly, "I never imagined it would lead to all this." The coat itself had become something of a legend. Now carefully preserved in a display case in the new center's lobby, it had inspired similar acts of kindness across the country. Other cities had their own symbols: a pair of boots in Chicago, a military blanket in Los Angeles, a backpack in Houston, each representing a moment when someone stopped to help. Mary stepped up to the podium, looking out at the gathered crowd. "1 year ago, I was homeless on these streets," she began. "Today, we've helped over 2,000 veterans find their way back. But the numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is in the lives changed, the families reunited, the hope restored." She pointed to faces in the crowd as she spoke. The former Navy cook who now ran a successful food truck business, the Air Force mechanic who'd started a job training program, the Army nurse who coordinated medical services for homeless veterans. Each one had their own story of falling down and getting back up. The new center would be their biggest yet. 5 floors of comprehensive services for veterans: housing assistance, job training, medical care, mental health support, and most importantly, a community of people who understood. The top floor even had temporary apartments for veterans in immediate need. Trump took the stage briefly, but he kept his remarks short. "This isn't about me," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "This is about all of you, about Americans helping Americans, about remembering that every person has value, has worth, has the potential to rebuild their life." After the ceremony, Marie led tours of the new facility. Each floor represented another step in their expanding mission. The walls were lined with before and after photos. Veterans on the street next to images of them in new jobs, new homes, new lives. Not just success stories, but proof that change was possible. In the community room, a group of veterans gathered for their weekly support meeting. Some were newly arrived, still wearing the weight of the streets in their eyes. Others were program graduates, coming back to help those who followed. The circle of support kept growing, kept strengthening. As evening approached, Marie returned to her office in the new building. A frame on her wall held the newspaper clipping from that first day. Next to it hung photos of hundreds of veterans who'd found their way through the program. Each face told a story of resilience, of second chances, of hope restored. Her phone buzzed with a message from a veteran they'd helped last week. Got the job. Starting Monday. These messages never got old. Each one represented another life turned around, another story of hope. Looking out her window at the spot where her own story changed, Marie reflected on the power of human connection. One person stopping to help another. That help being passed forward, again and again, creating a chain reaction of kindness that kept growing, kept strengthening. The sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of hope. On the streets below, Volunteers from their night outreach program headed out, carrying warm clothes and information about their services. Because somewhere out there, another veteran was waiting to be seen, waiting for their moment of change, waiting for someone to stop and say, "Let me help." The story that began with a coat on a cold morning had become something bigger than anyone could have imagined. But at its heart, it remained simple. One human being seeing another, really seeing them, and choosing to make a difference. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life, or thousands of lives.